I will talk about climate change and conflict. I've been changed my slides. I don't even know how many times. Even when Wolfgang started it, I added 2 more. So I will spare you. I will jump, right? Because there is a lot, in this literature. Probably there are thousands of papers that they have been published, so you have to bear with me. But I will start with the IPCC. I will not show you how temperature has increased, but I will go directly to these climatic events, and you will see since 1970s, the number of the events have increased, and especially we care about the climatic, which is the floods and the droughts, things that they are related very much to climate change. And then, if you look at the numbers of the individuals who have been affected by those climatic events are huge. You have something like 2.2 billion people been affected in the last decade, and these numbers are growing. And if you look at the economic losses, again, you'll see that the storms are the ones that are producing the most costs. Now, these costs are not evenly, falling around the globe, right? Where in actual amounts, the developed countries suffer the most because of the infrastructure. If you see it as a percentage of the GDP, it's the less developed countries that they are suffering the most. So since 1990s, the concept of security, I will not argue for today, it has changed. Up to that point, everybody talked security in terms of the national sovereignty, right? Maintain your sovereignty, your autonomy. But, things changed in the 1990s because of all these climatic events, and we start taking into account climate as one of those, the environment in general. And you had major political leaders like Obama or Ban Ki-moon who stressed that climatic, threats are going to impose huge security costs for the countries in the world, and they mention often the case of Lake Chad or Darfur as climate wars. But we know that some experts now say that, climatic changes will reduce some resources, and that is going to create conflicts between states and also individual groups inside countries, and that is going to be the case particularly in developing countries. So we now, the scholars, we decide to study climate and conflict, right? Oh, we are everywhere. We started with this direct, so all of us, we start with climate change, either climate variability, change in the temperature and precipitation, or climatic events, droughts, floods, mention it. Then we say, okay, that is going to affect us as humans, and that is going to increase aggression, and you are going to have interpersonal violence, or you are going to create some type of resource scarcity, and that is going to create intergroup. And it can be either between small groups going up to the states. But, there must be a reason, right? Scarcity, then, it comes down to how the climate affects the economy or how our climate will affect the migration. So we are here right now. It was the first part of the research, but yet people continue to look at this. Where is Niger? The direct linear regression models. So we start with this temperature and aggression hypothesis. You're rising the temperatures, that will create some kind of change in your physiological and psychological stress, high adrenaline, for example, and people will start, fighting each other. They will increase rapes, robbery, any type of interpersonal crimes, and there is some evidence which shows that during hot days we keep, honking much more, or in baseball games in the United States, the pitchers are more likely to hit the batters just for the fun of it. But the problem is that, this interpersonal violence cannot be extended to intergroup, simply because you will have a collective action problem. The fact that I feel hot today, it's not going to make everybody else join me against a rebellion. So there is a lot of evidence, but you cannot aggregate this to a high level of analysis. So we do have this second argumentation, which is there is resource scarcity, you have a drought, there is going to be a reduction in the water and the land, then we will start, there is less water in the well, we will start competing now for this kind of what is left, and then conflict is going to occur. Okay. We do have some instances between the herders and the pastoralists in the West Africa and East Africa. But there are some people who have found that when it rains, when there is more precipitation, then there is more conflict because there is more, more vegetation that you can steal, or, the animals are fatter, you can make a better profit, and strategic reasons. And that goes against the scarcity argumentation. But the thing is that we do have a lot of people who like to test this direct relationship. And here what you have, right? I have done this figure here. Pretty much I have the global data set of all civil conflicts that they have occurred for the period 1989 to 2001. And I don't have, they have to have at least over one, because if I have one, then the United States should have a conflict because of the September 11. So we exclude all the cases in which case there was only one incident. And then I put on top of it the Palmer drought index, and then you can see a perfect correlation, right? When we have hot weather, you have conflict, correct? Yes, and there are a couple of people publishing PNS and the Science, which they're trying to quantify this direct relationship. Temperature goes up, conflict goes up, right? And they came into these crazy numbers, right? By 2030, armed conflict will increase by 54%. And that will add 393,000 more battle deaths. And that was for Africa. Then you have Xiang et al. They had a meta-analysis of 60 cases, anything from interpersonal to intergroup. They put them together, a linear regression model, fixed effects, both time and country, no other controls. And what they find, an increase by 1 standard deviation in temperature will increase conflict, intergroup conflict, by 14%. Well, it's not like that, guys. Because if you see, this is what we had for Africa, right? Climate and conflict. Where conflict occurs, here what you have, the white is where income is between $0 and $1,000. And you see that conflicts are concentrated in low-income countries. And then you go on and you look at democracy, political institutions. Where most conflicts occur? Well, the countries are not really democratic. And as a result, the IPCC report, the 5th, comes out and said, okay, there is no really a direct relationship, right? But rather there is an indirect one. You have political institutions and the like to condition this kind of relationship. And they were pretty firm about it, but we still keep doing this. I don't know why, but we do. So then we moved, okay, we need to find out the conditions right now. So we said, okay, we know, again from the IPCC, that when climate changes, that is going to have a lot of influence on the well-being of the people, the economy, and most likely the agriculture will suffer the most, right? So they said, okay, how can we think about it? Climate hits, the economic growth will be reduced, agricultural production will reduce, food prices will go up, and governments will lose a lot of money in the coffers because they cannot tax, but also if they need to protect people, then the insurgents will have more power to hit back. So we came up with these 4 possible mechanisms, right, because of the economy. But why, war is going to occur or conflict is going to occur when these things happen? And then we borrow from the conflict literature 2 nice theoretical mechanisms. if the economy is not doing well, you are a farmer, there is a drought, there is not much work for you to do, right? You just sit and wait, and then the rebels will come, and they will convince you there is nothing for you to do if you join us, and we go against the government, and we win the government, we get the prize, right? So this is the so-called low opportunity cost of rebellion. And the second one is that when climate hits, and you are a farmer, your livelihood is going to be worse off now relatively to what it was 2 years or 3 years ago. So you start comparing yourself now with the past. So you start feeling itchy if you are not living well right now, right? But also, there is a tendency of the humans to compare ourselves with others, right? So what about, I'm a farmer, there is a drought, my livelihood has gone down, and she's a civil servant or a shopkeeper, and you don't feel anything. So this kind of relative and absolute deprivation increases the grievances. And that can act, as a mechanism that will pull people together, especially along some kind of ethnic, religious, and the like groups, to instigate rebellion. So, what do we know? Economic growth, it is Miguel and Toll, they did it a few years ago. They used the instrumental variable approach. Climate, it's not a good instrument for the economy. It's a very weak, but they found a very good result. True, bad economic because of climate, conflict. There were some others, they did pretty much the same, they got nothing. I did the same thing for Africa, but I used two-stages least square. So it was climate on the economy, the second regression on conflict. I found some relations, but conditional on the political system. So more likely to occur in autocracies. But, so there is nothing here. We are moving to agriculture, right? That agriculture will suffer decreased crop yields. And in reality, most papers, they do find a relationship. At the beginning, they look at the national level, but droughts do not hit the whole country all over, right? Unless the country is small, you will have different areas where agricultural production is going to go down, and conflict might have occurred somewhere else. So now they use all these disaggregate data sets that exist from Prio and Uppsala, and we can do those things. And also, researchers look at the particular agricultural goods that they produce. And they have found that the last one is very good. And it says that the risk of conflict in areas where there are 4 primary agricultural goods increases by 14%, the probability of conflict. Then it is about food prices. We do have some anecdotal evidence, right? The Arab Spring, for example, when droughts decreased production in these countries, prices went up. But it's not only droughts in the countries where the protests are going to happen, because there is all this international trade, right? Incidents of drought in Russia and in Australia or somewhere else might increase the prices in the less developed countries who are importers of these crops, and that is going to lead to people to go out. But this is not going to lead to conflict. It's going to be mostly riots, protests, and the like. We're talking about low level of violence here. And also there is some evidence that when droughts hit, the governments lose capacity because they have to provide for some of the affected people, and that gives some power, in change the relative power between the governments and the rebels, could hit back, but that is going to be mostly about extending the conflict rather starting a new one. So, overall, what I want you to take out of this is that drought and conflict primarily occur or coexist in countries which are agriculturally dependent. They have weak political institutions, weak economic development. They have marginalized groups, politically and ethnically marginalized groups, because that is going to work as a mechanism to reduce the collective action problem. And of course, if the country had a conflict before, well, very likely will have a conflict in the future. And there was an expert elicitation paper that was published in Science, Natural Science, in 2019 with 15 experts, and pretty much what they came about, they said, yeah, climate creates conflict to some extent, but is a weak predictor of conflict if it is to be compared with poor governance, bad economic conditions, and poverty, inequality, and the like. Now, I move now to the migration channels, which, yes, the indirect. Now, we know that there are a lot of people displaced, and at least the International Displacement Monitor Center says that for the last decade or so, there are more environmental migrants than conflict migrants. And based on this, we have some predictions about the future. So, these guys here, they predict that by 2050, 1.2 billion people will be environmental migrants. Then you had in science, which says that if you increase the temperature by 1 degree, you will have thousands and thousands of asylum seekers in the European Union. No, environmental migrants are not eligible for asylum. There is no environmental migrant is any person who is moving domestically or internationally, temporarily or permanently, because of some kind of climatic or environmental reasons. This is the official definition of the IOM. It includes everything. And they're not eligible for asylum. So in this analysis, if you drop Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, you get nothing, absolutely nothing. The only research which valid, but still problematic, is the World Bank Groundswell report, which they estimate that by 2050, 216 million people will move internally. They accept that environmental migration is going to be inside the country. But again, they use a gravity model, so they have a population, they hit it with the climate, and based on how populations move before, they will extrapolate in the future. There is nothing, it seems that everybody will react exactly the same. There is no technology, there is no adaptation, there is no institutions, there is nothing. But at least they are reasonable. I will leave all of those if you want to know, because I'm trying to explain what's an environmental migrant, right? Because I discuss it. So I will go to the migration and conflict. So this thing here about Syria, we had a huge debate. So we do have some anecdotal evidence, like Syria, our days, there is the American Dust Bowl in 1930s, but you cannot generalize by any means from single cases, right? Because what happened in Lebanon or Jordan or Egypt, did you have a civil conflict? No, you didn't. It was, and all of those countries suffered the same drought back in 2008 and 10 and 11. Then we have some others said, floods. No, they don't start conflicts, they prolong conflicts, right? Because of different mechanisms. And then you have some other who will say, no, there is no relationship. And this is very difficult to show that climate via migration is related to conflict, because you have to show that there is some kind of a drought. People move because of this drought, and the people who move somewhere, the same people are the ones who are going to cause the conflict. Well, with aggregate level of analysis, there is no way you can do that because you have ecological fallacy, right? You don't know what's happening. So why this is going to be conflict in the receiving areas? For reasons. They are going to be, it will strain the resources. The budgets are going to not be able to cover all the new needs. There is going to be competition between the locals and the newcomers. They're going to exacerbate grievances and the like. And of course, there will be tensions along some kind of political dividing lines. So you need two to tango, right? You need to have the localites and the incomers. So we did some research, and I will start with migrants, where now we know that these people, when they migrated to Nairobi, Kimusu, and what else I have? I don't remember. Mombasa, Kisumu, and Nairobi are environmental migrants, because we know that they left the places where they left from with actual data from the EM data, because we have geolocation of these people. We know that they were environmental migrants. So the idea here is that if you had suffered for a long drought, that means that you have grievances, right? Because, as I mentioned, you tend to compare yourselves with others, plus you need to go, you don't want to go, people are attached to their places, right? So if you are, at the end, you need to go, you are more likely, right, to be willing to participate in social movements when these social movements aim at rectifying, you know, all these type of grievances. So here are some descriptives. People, you know, are environmental migrants, have affected by both events, and most of them, they would like to participate in protests. So we ran some regressions, and what we find, that people who had affected only by sudden events, they're about 8% more likely to participate in protests, but if they have suffered too, both sudden and prolonged, they are about 14%. And this is for protest. They are even willing to participate in protests that can become violent. And when we calculate the marginal, the predicted probability, if you haven't, you know, experienced anything, you are about 40% more likely to, you know, to participate in protest. But if you had been affected by both, the predicted probability goes back up to 63. So that is a huge, huge effect. And what about the urbanites? In the European Union, after the Syria conflict, when we had all these migrants in 2015, there were a lot of surveys, right? How do you feel about the political migrants? And here we were so happy to have them. At least every survey showed that because of the humanitarian reasons, we should be willing to have these migrants in the European Union. So we did the similar thing. So we looked and we saw that in Vietnam, in Kenya, you know, leaving your place because of environmental degradation, it is an acceptable kind of reason to go to the urban centers. The problem is, when we ask them, could you please tell us how you will consider, you know, which kind of migrant you would like to come to your cities, and we divide those for migrants who come for economic reasons, environmental reasons, social reasons, or political reasons, both in Kenya and Vietnam. Economic migrants and environmental migrants do not differ whatsoever. We don't see this kind of humanitarian feelings that, you know, the Europeans extend to people who are flying persecution or, you know, the environmental degradation to be more welcome. What they care, can they feed themselves? Are they educated and they can provide for, you know, the society in these these new places? So what I would like you to take away is that the first, climate change does not directly affect the likelihood of conflict, except interpersonal. Okay, I will punch you because it's too hot. I'm too hot today. But not in starting a war or revolution or protest or any of those things. But climate change can escalate conflict because of bad economic condition in particular in agricultural dominated societies, and also with migration. But what is extremely important, and you need to remember this all the time, context matters. Whether you have a weak country, rich country, democratic country, autocratic country, minorities, inequality are going to be important. The problem is that we as scholars, we don't know much about. What we're doing so far is go to Africa, especially in Kenya, because English is, is the language they speak, right? And we look at these cases when it's convenient for us. But there are many countries who are kind of developed or semi-developed, and they have experienced climatic events, and conflict did not occur. And instead of going there and saying, okay, why conflict didn't occur here? To learn some lessons. We haven't done it. So we need to go and find out where and when. And the most important one is why this happened. Is it because of grievances? Is it because of the low opportunity cost of rebellion? I mean, if we don't know why conflicts occur, how can we go to the decision maker and say, guys, you need to do this policy or this? Pretty much we don't know much. And with that, I stop.